So welcome to the webinar, Diamond Model of Intrusion Analysis. This is a introductory examination of this material. This is a paper that I wrote. Quite a while ago. It's been a decade, actually, since it was released. We will go through a little bit more of the background of it, but Chris and Andy and I are actually all getting together to do a Diamond Model reunion later this year. So we will be doing a webinar for everybody, and we'll be talking about the Diamond Model and some of our stories and things of that nature. So join us when that pops up. So the other thing I wanted to do is I like to kind of do this stuff up front. There is another webinar from the Threat Intel Academy next month on kind of the basics of cyber threat intelligence. So what is cyber threat intelligence? How do you use it? Again, it's just a 1-hour introduction. I teach a very, very thorough course, probably the most thorough course in the world on cyber threat intelligence. But this is just an hour on kind of, hey, what is it? And, if you have somebody in your organization who kind of wants, who may need to know a little bit better about what cyber threat intelligence is and its value, and you want to help communicate to them this might be a good hour of their time. Plus, they can ask any questions that they have. So you can go ahead and sign up there. This webinar that we are on right now is absolutely going to be recorded and posted on YouTube as well as on the website, and it'll be emailed out to everyone who registered to the webinar itself. So you're absolutely welcome to share it later. Don't worry about recording. Obviously, if you want to record this right now, you're welcome to, but otherwise you don't need to worry about it. I'll take care of that, and you can send it out. So a couple other things just right up front, some Diamond Model resources for you. One is at diamondmodel.org, and that is where I host some content on the Diamond Model for you. So there's posters and there's different papers on it, links to blog posts about the Diamond Model, obviously links to the original paper itself. So all that you need for it. A question in chat: will CPE certificates be available after this webinar? No, you can get a CPE by submitting just your email that you registered for the webinar, usually to the organization that's managing your CPEs. But good point on CPE credits for webinars. Think about how I can do that a little bit easier for everybody. I know that is something people track. I used to do it pretty regularly, so I will look into that also for you for future webinars as well. Okay, so my name is Sergio Caltagirone. I am currently the president of the Threat Intelligence Academy, which is hosting this webinar. And before that, I've had a long career in threat intelligence. So I was the vice president of threat intelligence at Dragos until late last year, when I just was kind of really tired of a lot of things. Nothing wrong with the company. I got very, very burned out. And so I just needed some time away. So I've been spending my time teaching most of the time. And that's what I'm trying to do to recover. I'll probably get back into the industry, kind of on a day-to-day basis in the future. But right now, just trying to take some time off, honestly, and relax a little bit more than I've been able to in my career. So I helped start the threat intelligence. I did start the threat intelligence mission at Dragos, doing industrial controls, cybersecurity, and threats. I also am still currently the technical director at the Global Emancipation Network. If you want to know more about that, go to globalemancipation.ngo. And that is where we do a lot of internet-based counter-human trafficking work. So we work with lots of countries all around the world and all of the major internet service providers and content providers and so forth. I started my career at the U.S. Department of Defense, particularly the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, where I helped to start the cyber threat intelligence discipline. It was originally me and one other person that were doing it. And we helped to kind of found what it turns in what it turned into today. And so I did a lot of work at NSA, and then after NSA, I spent 4 years at Microsoft helping to establish their own cyber threat intelligence mission, and I was one of the founders of the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, Mystic. So I've been all over, and I've done lots of things in my career, and so now I like to teach a lot about it, because I think that there's a lot of people who are entering the cusp of their career, who are leading teams and growing new intelligence capabilities in their own organization and driving new defense type operations around the world. And I feel like I have fought a lot of battles and I've made a lot of mistakes. And my job right now is to help you all get better faster than I was able to get, started, because we didn't really have any material to learn when we started. So anyway, I'd love to get you all going faster in your career. And that's kind of wholly what the diamond model is. So this kind of says, why do we need another model, right? I mean, there are hundreds of models. There's lots of cybersecurity models. Creating a model is not something that I set out to do. And it wasn't something that I actually am. I'm very proud of the diamond model, but adding to the corpus of models in the world that people already have to kind of know and understand isn't something that I'm super proud of. So I don't like adding more work to people generally. So basically, I always ask myself the question, why the diamond model? What is it? And why should you spend a little bit of time understanding what it does? So this is actually a room I used to work in. This is at the National Security Agency. And I spent many a long evening in this room. This is what a lot of people think intelligence looks like. It's dark lights, it's lots of computers, it's, all of this kind of jazz, if you will. When really threat intelligence really looks more like this. It's a lot of people hanging out, talking about stuff happening. It's kind of like threat intelligence is kind of like the gossip watering hole for cybersecurity. And I say that with all love and respect to my colleagues, but I think most people would agree that it's pretty much the gossip center of cybersecurity. So, but this is kind of how that work gets done. If you think about it, like intelligence gets done by people talking to each other, communicating about what's happening, what they're finding, what they're seeing. So you would expect that cyber threat intelligence is no different than traditional intelligence and how it operates, which is true. Right, traditional intelligence is all about rumors and facts and hypotheses and assumptions and trying to guess what's going to happen or what did happen. Everything it's all that weird stuff right in there, and so this is really actually closer to what I feel like threat intelligence is. But really, what threat intelligence looks like is more like this, and where we have a whole bunch of data from all of these different places, and really we're just trying to put it all together in a picture to understand how does this fit together, and now what do you do about this thing that you've got, this incident, this threat actor, this malware, that whatever you've got to kind of now deal with is something that we work on in threat intelligence, and primarily in threat intelligence is that is really the goal of threat intelligence is fundamentally to get to the question of what do you do? What happened, what is going to happen, and what are you going to do about it? And the diamond model is really about looking at this whiteboard and trying to organize yourself into some sort of coherent picture that makes sense. Okay, so the question comes down to that in 2000 and I don't even remember anymore, 7, 8 maybe, and into 2009 even. So it was me and a few folks at NSA, and all of a sudden, it was counterterrorism, right, for national security priorities. And then in about 2007 and 8, 2008, it turned into, well, cyber's become a really big deal. And the question though was, well, how do we get to thousands of people doing this, right? So it was just a few of us, and they asked us the question, okay, if we gave you 200, 300, 400 people, how would you train them? How would you go about organizing their work so that they could work together? How would they communicate with each other or operate on all of this data effectively? And so the question came down to Chris and Andy and myself, and a bunch of others who have been left unnamed in the report that deserve credit as well. But they decided to leave their names off of the report for other reasons. So, but I think that fundamentally it comes down to, well, how do we do our work? And this is an important question because fundamentally synthesis and correlation are critical components of intelligence. In fact, they are the most important components of intelligence. So it's really hard to describe how you put information together when really that's important. If you don't know how you came to a conclusion or how you came to an understanding of something, it's very hard to understand, well, how good is that conclusion? Did I follow all the right things when doing it? Can that be tested? Can other people judge it or criticize what I've come up with? So we had this real fundamental problem of intelligence. We still deal with this problem, but we try to build these kind of frameworks and models to improve, or I should say reduce these problems when it comes to actually creating good intelligence. Richard Sewer wrote a fantastic book, The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis, which I recommend you all read. And he basically said it's not good enough to just think about what is happening, but how you came up with what is happening. So you have to be self-conscious about how you're thinking, not just what you're thinking about. And the process of thinking is itself important. And we know this, right? Cognitive psychology is all about the process of thinking and understanding how humans think and observe and correlate pieces of information about their world. So we already have an entire field of science that studies, cognitive psychology, that studies how people absorb and consume and understand information. And that could be, hey, people only remember between 5 and 7 things in their short-term memory, right? Or they retain that. Or you could say, a password longer than 12 characters is not going to be remembered by 80% of the population. Those are findings about cybersecurity by cognitive psychologists. And this is no different. We have to think through how we get to where we are. So what is first of all, before we kind of dive into what is the diamond model, first I'm going to talk about what it is not. First, it is not how do you get attribution? It is not an attribution model. Originally, when the diamond model came out, a lot of people were like, oh, this is finally the attribution model. It's because it is used as an element of attribution or moving towards attribution. It is not actually how you achieve attribution. Attribution is all about data, by the way. It's all about facts and data. It's not really about the model you're using around it. You either have the data which supports a conclusion of attribution, or you don't. It's just like another analytic hypothesis or assumption that you're making. A model is not going to prove or disprove your attribution. It isn't also perfect. It's not infallible. It is also not an unnecessary complication, which I've heard some people say. It's like, oh, I don't need to know the diamond model. It just makes things more complicated. It really doesn't. It actually simplifies things. But I always say that a model is as useful as you want it to be. Also, the diamond model paper contains a fair amount of mathematics. And the reason of that is because language is hard. One, language is hard between people who even speak the right language, or not the right language, I'm sorry, the same language. But it's even harder, of course, when you cross language boundaries. And because intrusion analysis and cyber threat intelligence analysis is universal, right? It's something we all have to do all around the world. It's not just an American problem or an English-speaking problem, right? It's everybody's problem. I wanted to provide some sort of universal language using standard mathematics to describe the model itself in order to actually increase the adoption and understanding of the model. So that's why it's there. And you can actually, when you read the Diamond Model paper, you can skip the math entirely and understand it. It is just there as an additive feature of additional methods of communicating the ideas. Okay, so then what the heck is it? So it is a representative of something that we study. And there is a question in the chat, or has been sent to me. Are we able to explain how to use a diamond practically? Yes, we will. Exactly, we will. So the diamond model is a representative feature of something we study. It's very much like, you know, your standard science models. So you can look at the model here on your left and you can say, oh yeah, that's the standard water cycle that we all basically learned in elementary school. Water goes up, water comes down, right? And goes up and goes down. It does that repeatedly. Or you can look at the right and you can see these meteorological weather charts. These are the same thing, just looking at data differently. Right? They're looking at the same thing, but in a different way. One is over a period of time in a very simplistic graphical kind of way. And another one is a very data-rich point in time approach, but they both model the same data. So you can look at something in multiple ways. And that's what the diamond model helps us provide. And so its primary goal is to get you better hunting, better intelligence, know which questions you should be asking, correlate and synthesize things together so you know, oh, this thing is like this thing. Why are those two similar? Which is also important, not just saying these two are similar, but why? What features of them actually make them connected or interconnected? We can look at activity over time, how things change. Did activity change over time? Did they introduce new malware, but they're using the same infrastructure? Improve documentation, generate activity groups or intrusion sets or threat groups or whatever term you want to derive. So yes, these are all the things that we're going to talk about some of them. So you can use the diamond model throughout the intelligence cycle. So you can use it to translate requirements into like analysts speak, right? To say, oh, they really want to understand the malware involved in this. They're using these, I want to know about the attack and then what do they do and all that. You could say, okay, well, they really want to understand the malware and the methodology and things like that. So you can get that down to actual words that analysts understand. You can also identify collection gaps with this. You can say, okay, well, this is the question we have because the diamond model shows that there's a gap here. And we can actually ask the question, well, where should we go get that data? And we can also just, again, we can move all the way through it and we will, but then we can talk about dissemination. How do we communicate better? And again, if you have a similar lexicon, then, using the diamond model, then you will have more important community or more beneficial communication, less communication errors. So the diamond model at its core is 4 features. So it is a graph, which is why we call them features and nodes, but it is 4 interconnected features. And basically this comes off of an axiomatic approach. So what we did when we sat down at the whiteboard was, what is the most basic thing that we know about? And then we started asking the question, well, how do we know what we know? And it's a very philosophical approach, right? Which is, if you take the Socratic method and you keep asking the question why, eventually you'll find out where it starts, or at least where your knowledge ends. And so we took a very, very Socratic method and we said, okay, well, in intrusion analysis, this is the first why. Why did something happen? It happened because there's an adversary doing something, taking a capability over infrastructure against a victim. Without any of those 4 components, there is no why, because there can be no intrusion. So we basically kept asking ourselves the question until we got down to this level. And we said, okay, well, this is now the basis of all intrusion activity. There have to be these 4 components. And we connected them. We said, well, what can I see? If I'm sitting on my graph, if I'm sitting in the world, and I'm sitting at like let's say a DNS server. If I'm sitting at a DNS server in the world, what can I see from that DNS server? And we said, okay, well, that's going to be infrastructure, right? DNS or name servers, email servers, all of this stuff, IP networks and so forth are all going to be infrastructure. What could I see from that? If I stood there and I looked, well, I could see tools, right? I could potentially see, it doesn't mean everything is everything, okay? But from an infrastructure perspective, I could see the tools being used against the victim, right? Because I would be able to see them transmit something, right? There'd be some sort of transmission, which is what infrastructure is for, to move capabilities, to move command and control between things. Okay, so from there, if I can get the tool, I could look at, from infrastructure, I could look at the tool, I could ask the question, what could I see from the tool? Well, I could potentially see who built the tool, who's using the tool, and who that tool is being used against. And again, this diamond model doesn't say that you can see all of it. It just says with perfect visibility, perfect collection, you could see this. And that's again where it focuses the analyst on what is the question you want to ask, where is the data that's going to get you that question or answer that question for you. So again, these points on the diamond model here are connected for a reason. This is not just to make some sort of silly like geometric shape. And people do that to me all the time. What's the tetrahedron of intrusion analysis and things like that. And I can tell you that they're connected this way because it tells you the relationship from each point to each point. Now, there is almost never, so don't say never, but almost never a relationship between the adversary and victim. Not a relationship, I'm sorry, a direct connection. It is almost always through some sort of medium or infrastructure, because the adversary and victim are not the same people, right? Or organization or country, or however you want to define adversary and victim there. And so because there is no connection between adversary and victim, like there is between the others. We do have other things though. We'll get a little bit deeper here. So with that, again, it gives us kind of a map. We can put it in the palm of our hand and we can ask the question from here, I want to get here. Well, how do I do that? Right? Well, if I'm the victim, I can ask the question, what infrastructure is being used against me? Okay, so then I can go from the infrastructure and say, what tools are using that infrastructure? And then from there, I can ask the question, who's building those tools? And I could potentially get there, right? So I can move across this diamond like a map of analysis. I could ask these questions and get answers to them. And eventually you'll have enough answers that you'll be able to ask or answer bigger questions, like why are they doing this to us? What was their intent? How long have they been doing it? All of this. And this is why on the left here, we have these meta features. We have timestamp. When did this happen? We have the phase. Was this the beginning, middle, or end of the attack or intrusion? What was the result? Did they take data? Did they, install ransomware or whatever? What was the directionality of the attack? Was it towards me or against me? Towards me or, I'm sorry, away from me? Was I a victim and then also an attacker, right? Did they use me as another piece of infrastructure? Directionality isn't one that's thought of by a lot of people, but as you get into the more advanced attacks, that directionality becomes more and more important. It's one of the few features of the diamond model that isn't used by many people, because they don't see attacks most people do not see attacks that have very odd directionality. There's some attacks that are just one way, that don't require bidirectionality. And there are all other attacks that make it look like it's one direction, but it's really the opposite direction. So it's just a lot of funkiness that happens later on. There's the resources that were used. Did they have to have a piece of malware? Did they write this piece of malware? Did they have to have, 10 people operating it? Things like that. And then, of course, the methodology, right? How did they do it? And this is where MITRE ATT&CK and the kill chain fit in. So just as a preview for about 10 minutes from now, the kill chain, the cyber kill chain, or any of the kill chains you want to follow, because there's more than one, any of the kill chains will fit into the phase, right? So the phase is the same as the kill chain phase, if you want to think about it, or the step of the kill chain. And then methodology is the attack framework. Okay, we have a question from the chat. Is the goal always to characterize the adversary? Absolutely not. You can absolutely stop at capability and infrastructure. In fact, we didn't even have the adversary in the very, very original model. It was not really there, and we just left it at victim infrastructure and capability. So yes, you can use it entirely from just a victim's perspective. But again, because this is a model for everybody to use, it also includes, other things. A great example of the adversary perspective, right, is that there are news reports of people getting closed circuit television access to watch certain adversaries to operate. So they will actually see the adversaries typing things into the keyboard. So that's a great example of watching the adversary typing things in, which could be infrastructure, connecting to a victim. So there you could actually start at the adversary node, again, if you have that level of visibility, and you can move outward from there. So again, just like you could start from the victim and move outwards, you can start from the adversary and move inwards, if you want to think about it like that. So no, it is not the goal to characterize the adversary at all. We use this for malware analysis. We use this to ask questions about, okay, if this piece of malware or this family of malware, can we ask the question, what are all of the victims that have been affected by this piece of malware? What are all of the pieces of infrastructure that have been used to deliver or communicate or enable this piece of malware or this malware family? So you could do it from a malware perspective, a malware family perspective. Of course, when I was at Microsoft, one of the things we focused on was infrastructure. How does Microsoft's global infrastructure support the delivery of malware? How do our customers at Microsoft, which are victims, who are they? What do they do? What's happening to them? Things like that. So then we were an infrastructure provider. Of course, as we grew into things like cloud and so forth, we became a capabilities provider as well. So there were other things we could ask. So yes, from every point of the diamond, you could just jump one other point and you can ask lots of questions from there. The other thing we can do is we can extend the diamond model. So here we add two overlays onto the diamond model, which we call the social, political, and the technology extension. Basically, they're called the extension features or additional features. And they represent relationships. So the social political relationship, there is always some sort of relationship between the adversary and victim. Now, it could be indirect, as in, oh, this adversary just wanted to get as many people as possible, so that's it. Congratulations. We call those victims of opportunity in criminology. Or they could be victims of intent, meaning they fit a specific pattern that the attacker was looking for. Again, if we want to borrow straight out of criminology. So there is always some relationship between victims and adversaries. We already know this from the fundamentals of crime. So now the question is, what type of relationship is it? Those are the questions we want to ask with the social political feature. Next is the technology feature. There is a technology relationship between the infrastructure and capability. And it could be very simple, like HTTP, or it can be something very, very complex, like something that requires some sort of multimodal or interpretive kind of features to make things work. But fundamentally, there has to be some sort of relationship between infrastructure and capability. A good example of that would be if somebody is a good example would be if somebody is hosting malicious URLs on Microsoft help articles. Okay, so they're adding comments to Microsoft help articles, right? And they're adding malicious URLs there, right? So this is again where the technologies match, right? We have to have a technology that can read. There has to be a technology that can read these comments, or somebody to click on these comments, and we have to have something to deliver these comments into it, right? And they have to be able to work together. Everyone has to have a browser or an API or something like that. So if we ask the question, okay, how could we stop this? We could just say, well, we won't let anyone post URLs to Microsoft help articles anymore. It breaks the technology chain, right? They're going to have to find a way to connect these things some other way. So it's an example of how you can look at this problem and ask the question, how could we stop this from happening? Because that's fundamentally the question we ask with the diamond model is, what are the vulnerabilities of the adversary's operations. What are the things that if we did something, it would stop them or weaken them or reduce, all of these words we use around that. Social political is the same way, right? How do we ask the question, how do you not become a victim? We ask that question all the time. We ask that question in traditional criminology. We ask that question in cyber criminology, right? How do you not become a victim, right? We usually tell people like, well, don't click on links, don't patch your machines, all of this stuff. That is all connected to the social political, the questions we ask. How is a relationship made between an adversary and victim? And how could we break that relationship so that it cannot continue that way? Again, so the critical element of the diamond model is getting to the questions that will help with mitigation, either mitigation at a global scale or mitigation within your single network. One of the, I've been kind of leading you through, one of the key elements of the diamond is, of course, pivoting. And this was the very, very first thing we were teaching analysts using the diamond model, which is, I've got this piece of data. What other things can I learn from it? And so here you can see that a victim discovers some malware. That malware they reverse engineer or throw into a sandbox that contains a command and control string or command and control domain. Then we can go ask that command and control domain, hey, what IP address resolves that domain? We can then ask the question, has our firewall or network, monitoring devices, has it seen any connections with that IP address? And then we can also ask the question, well, who owns or monitors or maintains that IP range? And could we go ask them now, which would get us closer to the adversary? So this is an example of how you can move from one point of the diamond to others. And again, all from a victim perspective. This one starts with the victim and ends with the victim. We can just ask other people questions. Your intelligence collection doesn't have to be limited to what you yourself can see. You can always leverage other people's knowledge and visibility around the world as well. The other thing we can do is effective hunting. And this was the second major use case that the diamond model provided. Was the question is, so the very first question we had, with the diamond model was, I know this to be bad. What else is connected to it? And that's how we got pivoting. Because we had the question, trust me, in 2004, 2005, 2006, when we opened up Pandora's box and we saw all of the stuff happening around the world to victims in every country, we started asking the question, well, how do we track this stuff? How do we find out where the adversary is moving? What's changing? What other things do we need to see that we're not seeing? This is where we used pivoting. And that was our very first model of stuff. Because one, we didn't have the number, we didn't have a lot of people still. And two, we didn't really know how to find intrusion activity. Honestly, like we would have to write detections, which meant we had to know something first to get there. And a lot of times that was really, really hard, or it wasn't working very well. So the next question is, once we had enough people tracking what we already knew, then the next question was, well, what don't we know? What are the new things that we need to be tracking that we're not tracking? And that's where the threat hunting piece came into being. So we found out that the diamond model, again, this was all trial and error, by the way. Like, we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't just sit here and come up with like some academic model of the diamond. This was realized that we came up with the diamond model. The first time we came up with the diamond model was like 2007, somewhere in there. The model wasn't published until 2013. Right, so we're talking 7 years, and we were basically using it and abusing it and testing it and figuring out what we could and couldn't do with this model for 7 years before we even published it. This was not a model that we sat down and we were like, what are the 10 ways we could use this model? It wasn't. It was, oh, well, we could also use the diamond model for this because we're already trying to solve this problem. Oh, look, it seems to work. Okay, that's great. And so all of this came back down through trial and error and modification, and the diamond model changed over those 7 years, as it should have. So just to give you some background and insight into it, right? That's how this model came around. It wasn't an academic exercise. It was an operational exercise to figure out how we do this stuff. So one of the problems we had to solve was, how do we find a malicious activity from the beginning? If you don't know about it, how do you find it? And what we found is that we could use these things called centered approaches. And that's just a term we came up with to kind of describe the methodology in tradecraft. And what we said is, well, each of these features of the diamond model can be focused on to find interesting stuff. And so, for instance, if I wanted to do threat hunting on capabilities, I could ask the question, what new executables have I seen in my network over the last 30 days? And that could be a place where I could start. And I'm going to start at the capability side. I could also ask the question, what are the first seen URLs that have hit my network over the last, 10 days or 5 days? And network traffic's a lot harder, a lot more, voluminous, so it's a little bit more difficult. But we could ask simple questions like that. And again, you could get hundreds of questions out of each of these features. We can even ask the question, how do we find victims? I don't even know the adversary. I don't even know the infrastructure. I don't even know the capability. How would I find victims? Well, what I could do is I could start creating victim sets. I could say, okay, what are some elements, again, back to criminology, what are some elements that make a victim victims? Vulnerabilities. I could say, okay, well, who in the world is vulnerable to this type of attack? And I could start saying, okay, well, if I know that they're vulnerable to it, I know that there's a chance that they're being attacked with it. And then I could start saying, okay, are they being attacked with it? Can we see them being attacked with it? So now I can whittle the world down from, whatever, 1 billion networks, I think now in the world, right? 1 billion individual networks, I can whittle it down to maybe like 300. Right. So this is the power of these kind of centered approaches, is you can look and say, I'm going to look for malicious infrastructure today. And you can say, how am I going to take the world's infrastructure and start whittling it down to a small amount that I can look at myself or my team or whatever. And that's what we call these centered approaches. So it really dramatically increases your return on investment of threat hunting. You can find bad things faster using these centered approaches. And you can find different things. So you don't look at the same things all the time, which is something important, because adversaries, use varying different methods, various different ways of hiding, or deceiving, folks. And so you'll need different ways to look at data to find all of the ways that it happens. Another thing that I see, and we'll start talking about how you now integrate kind of these three models together, is people always say, oh, I don't need the diamond model, I just use the attack framework. Awesome, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me, it's whatever works for you. But fundamentally, you are following a completely incorrect path, because the diamond model, the kill chain, and attack are all complementary to each other. They are not competing whatsoever. They overlap for a very, very good reason. Katie and Adam and Blake and Andy and Mike and Eric, all the people who wrote attack, all the people who wrote kill chain, all the people who wrote diamond model, remember, we all worked together for a very long time. We all came up with this stuff at the same time. Why? Because it's like music. We work off each other, right? We're like, oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. We'll do this and this and this, right? Some things just took longer to mature than other things. MITRE attack was always a pie in the sky idea. What if we could enumerate every potential way that things happened? And we're like, well, I don't know any organization in the world who's ever going to fund and maintain that encyclopedia. Well, MITRE did it eventually. It took them a long time, right, compared to the diamond model and kill chain, but somebody eventually took on that problem. But that was, if you look at the diamond model and you look at the footnotes, it even says that we need a methodology, we need a method or a framework for enumerating methodologies for attacks. And then MITRE went and did it. Why? Because Katie and Adam and Blake and folks over there, knew that we needed to do it. So somebody stepped up and did it eventually. The diamond model preceded everybody, and that's not to say it's better. It was the first kind of formal model of intrusion analysis of threat intelligence that was created. But Mike and Eric created the kill chain. In fact, Eric was really angry at me and Mike was really angry at me because I took so long to publish it. It could have been published like back in 2010, but I wasn't ready. I didn't have the time. I had to go through all of these review cycles and all this ridiculousness to do it, and I had no energy in doing that. So they begged me to publish because they wanted to build on top of the diamond model as the kill chain was originally done. But it didn't go that way. So Eric and Mike published first in the kill chain, and then I followed up with the diamond model just a couple of years later. And then, of course, ATT&CK came out 5 years after that, I think. So yeah, so these are not mutually exclusive. So the key here is that if you look at the kill chain here on your right, you will notice that there's phases of activity. Again, we already talked about how in the diamond model there are phases of activity. And then again, that was created before the kill chain came out. The kill chain was created to answer the question, well, what are the phases? Can we think through an adversarial phase-based approach for mitigation? And so here you can actually put a diamond, an event, into each of these phases. And you can say, okay, here's how they did reconnaissance. This is the infrastructure they used. This is the capability that they used. This is the victim. And then you can go to the next part, like the delivery. You could say, here's the email server that they sent the email from. Here's the encrypted or zipped x64 executable that was attached to the email. That's the capability. Here's everyone it was sent to. It was sent to all the CFOs of the top 100 companies or something like that. So you could start, so you literally can see from one to the next all of these diamonds that basically get generated and presented. And then the questions come down to, well, what do you do with all this data, right? Which we'll talk about in a moment. Now the question is, though, is how did they do it, right? So spear phishing is a methodology. So we now use ATT&CK basically to ask the question, well, how did they do it? They used spear phishing. Okay, spear phishing fits in this phase of the model of the kill chain. And within that kill chain phase, they used this email server against these victims using this, using this piece of malware. So again, ATT&CK sits at the very top, right, of the hierarchy of understanding. And then it's the kill chain next, and then it's the diamond model at the base, which is how it was designed to be. So these things are all interconnected, and they are not one or the other. In fact, if you use one, you're using all the others, whether you want to or not. That's just unfortunately the way it kind of works. So anyway, that's just kind of what you have to think about. Now, I did publish a pretty good blog article on how to use them together. So if you want to go find that on the Threat Intel Academy site, you can see how they kind of work together to interact. So it gets down now to the question of, what about attribution? And everyone loves that word, right? Who done it? Right? It's like everyone wants to be Sherlock Holmes. The diamond model is, as I mentioned earlier, is not an attribution model. Okay, attribution is a feature of the facts and evidence you have. If you guess that it's China, you can guess that it's China, but I can also guess that it's poison ivy. Was the piece of malware. Those are, without evidence, those are the exact same guesses. Attribution doesn't have attribution as a hypothesis or as a some sort of assertion in intelligence is no different than this email server sent this email, right? So we treat it exactly the same. But the diamond model has nothing to do with it. Kill chain has nothing to do with attribution. ATT&CK has nothing to do. None of these are attribution models. Why? Because attribution doesn't have a model. Again, attribution is just simply an outcome of the facts you have as an analyst. Either you know who did it, or you're guessing is really it. It's okay to guess as an intelligence analyst, but you just realize what you have. You have an unfounded assertion, right, or a hypothesis. Then you have to go get data to support it. But we get a lot of analysts get very, very confused with these group things, right? These groups, these threat groups or adversary groups or whatever, right? And you can see some of the names on here, right? Fancy Bear and Platinum and TG3390 and all this stuff, right? And the question, and analysts always start, right? So people that are either new to CTI or maybe have an incorrect view of it, see these as the same thing, right? They're like, oh, well, platinum equals, right, whatever, Iran, and Iran equals these things. And everyone does the A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C, when those aren't really equal signs that we're talking about. Again, we can get deeper into analysis some other time, but fundamentally, you're not doing direct equality relationships between this stuff, which is why you can't just jump from one to another very easily, even though it makes it seem like people do. But we group for a lot of reasons. Grouping is very, very powerful and important. And let me show you a couple of examples of why you would group. That isn't attribution. So one of the reasons people do group is to get closer to attribution. Again, the question comes down to the diamond model allows you to ask the question, from what piece of data could I get to potentially another piece of data? Great, which means eventually, with the right visibility, you can get back to the adversary, right? We know this. It doesn't mean you can do it all the time, doesn't mean you can do it with the exact same efficiency or effectiveness, but it does mean you could, right, get there. Now, the challenge, though, is the more data, more evidence, more better approach, which is the diamond model allows you to ask these questions in a way that allows you to compile more evidence to support the hypotheses of a particular adversary, which is really what people think of when they think of the diamond model as an attribution model. It isn't, but what it does is it allows you to get to the data that supports attribution faster. Which is the whole point of the diamond model to begin with, but it does more than attribution, right? You can use that exact same methodology as I've been showing you to get to any of the points faster. It just, people use it a lot of times for attribution because a lot of people want to do that. So yes, so you can use it for that. Now, what you can do is you can build in the diamond model something called activity groups. Now, activity groups are simply clusters of similar activity. And you can similar activity anything you want, right? So you can pick any of the features of the diamond model and you can say, oh, these 4 intrusions all use the same name server, right? DNS name server, or right, the control, let me put it in a more specific way. The command and control infrastructure used in these 4 intrusions used domain names all hosted from this singular name server. So you could do that, and you could say, okay, I'm going to group all these together based on name server. Now, that doesn't get you your attribution, right? Because a lot of people could use the same name server, maybe. But that's kind of how it. It works. Because I could ask the question, show me all the things associated with this name server. We used to do that. We don't do it as much anymore, but there used to be a lot more bulletproof hosting services in the world, right? So hosting networks and environments and infrastructure that criminals could use basically without any harm coming to them, because the states and organizations that were countering cybercrime were not very effective at doing what they needed to do there. So there used to be a lot more of these bulletproof hosting services. That doesn't exist it exists a little bit, but not nearly to the extent it used to. So we used to group things up and say, okay, I just want to see all the malicious activity grouped into this name server or into this whatever /24 IP space. And we could ask that question, because now we could ask the question, okay, do all of these things I've grouped together, do they have another commonality, right? Outside of just shared name server? Do they seem to have any other shared characteristics I need to know about if I'm going to go after that particular network? So those are questions we could ask. So again, we can group for any number of reasons based on whatever analytic problem we're trying to solve. Now, I got to caution you that this is a very, very complicated method, and it's not easy to kind of start doing or learn how to do. And the one thing we didn't talk about so far is activity threads, which have to be built, right? Those are kind of beginning to end, like adversary did this, and this, right? And then we link them together in this way. So again, this is a 1 hour, very intro webinar. There's a lot of things that I am glossing over or even just skipping because I only have an hour to introduce this stuff to you. But fundamentally, Now I can start grouping together, and you can say, oh, these are the pandas and these are the bears and whatever you want to, right? And these are the hedgehogs and whatever you wanted to name. The more interesting questions to me, though, is that, yeah, pandas and bears and lions, oh my, are, we could say that's our biggest problem. But we could also distill those groups or groupings of activity down into common defensive recommendations. So we could say, okay, all of these groups, all of these activity groups seem to demand these same 3 defensive recommendations to mitigate the activity. And hey, these other ones over here that look completely different, they demand these 3 defensive recommendations. And so the question is, now I can say, okay, if I need to protect myself against pandas and bears, pandas are bears. Well, no, they're ursine, right? They're not ursine. They're not in the bear family, I think. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a zoologist. I just play with pandas and bears on the internet. So the challenge is that if you wanted to basically then, you're like, hey, we're being attacked by, pandas and bears, and the, CISO goes, well, what do we do about it? Is your answer to then just take literally everything the pandas do and everything the bears do and just kind of glump it together and be like, okay, here are the 30 recommendations you should be doing? I mean, you could do that, but I can guarantee you that's going to be a laundry list of things that could take years to develop or to implement. Instead, it would be much more efficient to say, here are the 5 things that are in common between the pandas and the bears, and you now whittled your list down to a priority set of defensive recommendations that could be implemented in a reasonable amount of time. So it gets you to the point where you can do better things, you can be more defensive, more defensible faster against what your adversaries are. Okay. Oh, you're welcome for the cute animal representations. Yeah, I like to. People do some weird things with the whole threat animal thing, and I'm like, yeah, they're just cute. Let's just call them cuddly bears. Okay, so again, and then I'm going to get to your questions now. So this is basically what we talked about. There's actually many more uses of the diamond model. We enumerate them in the paper and elsewhere, but here are the ones we talked about today, right? So threat hunting, how do I find threats to begin with? How do I correlate threats together to say this is like this? How do I get to faster, more efficient defensive recommendations? And then how do I communicate better? Right? Because we're going to be thinking and communicating in the same headspace. We're going to be using the diamond model together to talk about how our analytic process works. Well, I did this to find this, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know exactly why you did that, because you went from infrastructure to capability. And then you're going to be like, then I could ask the question, but did you do this? Because then I take my mind and I'm like, okay, I'm going to make the next leap, right? And that's how we can be very, very efficient and effective to use the diamond model. In all these ways. So there's so much more to the diamond model in there. Like I said, I just had an hour with you to give you the basics, and I wanted you to understand what it was. And again, here's some really easy things, that the more basic things you can do with it or understand your world better with it. Okay, let me answer a few questions in here. Yes. The PowerPoint and slides are going to go out with the webinar, so you will have that. I answered the second question, and let's see. Is there a good place to get examples of some examples or practical usage? Somebody asked for examples of practical usage. I do those in my class. I wasn't really, I did obviously talked through like, okay, you start, if you have a piece of malware, you could do this with it, you can do that with it. Yes, so there are examples out there. I don't have all of those enumerated, or I would say you probably wanted a specific example of what somebody's done. I did not do that in this webinar. I do apologize. Is there a good place to get another question? Is there a good place to get an example on how to incorporate the diamond model into report writing? No, report writing is very personal and difficult. And the answer is that the diamond model can be used can be used to organize a report. So you could say, okay, here's the infrastructure, here's the capabilities. You can do that, and depending on the type of report that you're doing. And in my career, we've kind of done that. We've said, okay, we're going to write a threat report. Here's an entire section just on the infrastructure. We're going to talk about all the infrastructure. There's another one on the capabilities, another one on the victim, right? And so you can use the diamond model to break things out in a report for certain audiences. Not all audiences, like executive audiences, are going to want to read a report like that. But yes, you can use it to kind of define what you want to talk about. Let's see. What would the recommendation or advice be for someone looking to invest in a threat intelligence platform or maximize Diamond, Kill, and MITRE? So the answer is that all the major threat intelligence platforms utilize the Diamond model. They don't all use the exact same language. That's just hard. They love to differentiate themselves from each other, hence the private sector model. But it's all in there, and whether you're using an open source tip or whether you're using a commercial tip, it will all allow you to define what is the capability, what are the infrastructure, who's the victim, and it will link and associate those features together for you. So it will do some of the basics of the correlation for you. Or you could click on a piece of infrastructure in one, and you can say, what are all of the capabilities? It's basically what it's doing. It's doing a pivot from the infrastructure to capabilities for you. So yes, almost every tip does that now. So you can also ask your threat intelligence platform provider if they do these things. How much do you support the Diamond model and things like that, if you're interested in its ability to be leveraged. Okay, would it be right to say that it's used to represent past incidents and to show future threats? Yes. So one thing that I didn't show in this webinar, again, time constraints, is that you can create attack graphs using the Diamond model. And that's in the Diamond model paper. There's an entire section on it, which shows you not only what happened, but what could happen. Right, so you can get exactly to that question that you asked. Okay, so how do you learn pivoting or learn pivoting methodology? I teach it in my class, and then I do provide examples of that in the Diamond model paper itself. So you can go ahead and use those and look at the example. I provide quite a lot of examples actually in the Diamond model paper. Another question, is there a difference between the Diamond model portion of my advanced CTI course and the Diamond model course? Yes, there is. The Diamond model course that I teach is like 12 to 16 hours long. It has lots of examples on create an activity group. Let's go through this activity thread. Let's do these pivots. Let's read this paper where somebody did these types of pivots and walk through them. That is not done in the advanced CTI course. We do spend time on the Diamond model, but it's limited to doing all of that work, where that class is very focused on just mastering all the Diamond model elements. Let's see, other questions. Is there any example of how intrusions are analyzed to extract the different elements and how they are grouped to create a new group? Yes, I have that in the Diamond model paper. And you can read that section on activity groups, and there's actually a six-step process to creating and then redefining activity groups. So you can create one and you can, recreate them over time. For anyone looking to improve their intrusion analysis skills using the Diamond model, do you have any methods or reports to use? It really is just the Diamond model paper that's out there. And then I also have links to other papers too there, and also some blog posts that I've written about it. And then of course, the Diamond model course that I mentioned. Could I give one or two more practical differences between capabilities and infrastructure? I always get myself thinking that two of them are similar. Yes. Okay, so this is something that is a great question. I think I've got, maybe I'll just spend 1 minute on it here for you. The Diamond model is what you make of it. If something fits better as infrastructure, it's okay if it's not perfect. The world is not perfect. No model can be perfect. So if something fits better for your analysis, for what you're trying to solve, or the organization you're trying to defend, then that's where it fits best, is the answer. And I can tell you that that's going to work for you, because the Diamond model is fairly extensible and usable in that way. So as long as you're generally consistent with your own mental model of, oh, this is going to be infrastructure, this is going to be capability, then you're going to be okay. Now, let me just really quickly give you some examples, right? IP addresses of hosts are network infrastructure, but the piece of malware that is communicating with that IP is a capability. Another thing is a compromised cloud infrastructure can be used as a compromised cloud host can be used as infrastructure against yourself or others. And therefore, that's it. RDP, like remote desktop, this is interesting. It can be classed as both a capability and infrastructure. So you could say the RDP was both the capability and infrastructure. You could obviously go further and say they used this type of RDP client, or if you wanted to break it down into software, if you even knew, then you could do that. But again, certain things can be one thing and the other, depending on their context and usage by the adversary. So yeah, the world is not simple, and there's not always going to be one way to think about it. And it's okay if you are like, oh, well, this is both capability and infrastructure. Well, then it can be. And that's okay. So yeah, so there's a few examples of where things can get messy and where things are a little bit clearer. Great. Well, that's the end of the webinar today, everybody. I appreciate your time. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can just go to the Academy site, drop me questions. You can also email me at sergio@threatintel.academy. And I'd love to hear if you have any other comments or questions. Thank you so much. Have a great day.